the land and the people. Close your eyes now. Breathe slowly. Let the world around you soften into silence. Tonight, we drift into a land both real and legendary, the homeland of the ancient Gauls. We will walk their forests, stand upon their hills, and listen to the wind as it carries voices from more than 2,000 years ago. Before we speak of kings and wars, of heroes and defeats, we must begin with the land itself. For it was the land that shaped the Gauls, as surely as water shapes stone. The land of Gaul. Imagine Europe long ago, before cities of stone and cathedrals rose, before highways and trains crossed its valleys. This is a land of rivers and mountains, of endless forests and broad plains. To the north, the chill winds of the Atlantic crash upon the shores, where waves roar against rocky cliffs. To the south, the blue shimmer of the Mediterranean, with its bright sun and soft breezes, touches the edge of the land. To the east, mountains rise like ancient guardians, the mighty Alps, snow-crowned and eternal. And to the west, the Pyrenees stretch between Gaul and Spain, jagged peaks wrapped in mist. This was Gaul, the land of the Celtic tribes who would one day be known as the Gauls. Today, we call it France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, even northern Italy. But in their time, it was not one nation. It was a tapestry of forests and fields, of hills and valleys, a mosaic of tribes living in scattered villages and fortified towns. The heart of Gaul was the great river Seine, winding like a silver thread through fertile lands. The Loire, the Rhone, the Garonne, the Rhine, all flowed through their world, carrying water, fish, and trade. The rivers were roads, long before stone roads were laid by Rome. Along their banks, the Gauls built their homes, planted their crops, and raised their cattle. In spring, the land was alive with color. Meadows filled with wildflowers, bees humming in the air, forests bursting with green. In summer, golden fields of barley and wheat swayed in the wind. In autumn, orchards bent heavy with apples, and vineyards ripened with grapes. And in winter, snow lay over the hills, muffling the world in quiet. This was the land that shaped them, a land of beauty and abundance, but also of wildness and danger. Bears and wolves prowled the forests, boars rooted in the undergrowth, fierce and untamed. The Gauls hunted them with spears and courage, and in doing so, became hunters themselves. Warriors hardened by the wild. The people of this land called themselves Celts. To the Greeks, they were Keltoi. To the Romans, they were Galli, the Gauls. They were not one nation, but many tribes. Each tribe had its own leaders, its own warriors, its own fields and gods. Some were farmers, some were raiders. Some traded with the Greeks of Massilia, the city we now call Marseille, where the Mediterranean touched Gaul. Others wandered as mercenaries, selling their swords to distant kings. They shared a language, though each tribe spoke it with its own flavor. They shared a culture, though customs shifted from valley to valley. Yet to outsiders, the Greeks, the Romans, they were all one people. The Gauls, they were tall, with hair often fair or red, their bodies strong from labor and battle. The men wore tunics of wool, belted at the waist, and trousers called braque, dyed in bright colors, striped or checked. Around their necks gleamed golden torques, heavy rings that marked their wealth and courage. Their hair was often washed with lime, stiffened into wild spikes that shone in the sun. Their mustaches were long, their eyes fierce. To the Romans, they looked like warriors born of storms. The women, too, were tall and strong, with braided hair, clothed in dresses of linen and wool, adorned with jewelry of bronze, silver, or gold. They kept the hearths, raised the children, worked the fields, but they also held respect in society. Among the Gauls, women could own property, and in some tribes they even advised chiefs or led warriors. The Gauls were both farmers and fighters. By day they tilled the soil, tending wheat and barley, herding cattle, sheep, and horses. By night they feasted. Around fires they roasted boar, drank mead, and told stories of heroes and gods. Their music was wild and stirring, played on pipes, horns, and drums. Their voices rose in song, filling the night with echoes that mingled with the wind. Villages and towns. The Gauls lived in scattered villages, clusters of wooden houses with thatched roofs. Each house was round or rectangular, built of timber and clay, with smoke rising from a central fire. The hearth was the heart of the home, where families gathered to eat, to tell stories, to dream. Larger tribes built oppida, fortified towns upon hills. From these strongholds, they ruled their lands, traded with neighbors, and prepared for war. High walls of timber and earth encircled them, gates guarded to warriors with shields and spears. Inside, craftsmen worked bronze and iron, shaping weapons, jewelry, and ornaments of astonishing beauty. Trade flowed through Gaul. From the Mediterranean came wine and olive oil. From the north came amber and furs. The Gauls gave in return their iron, their cattle, their slaves. They were not an isolated people, but a people connected to the wider world. Warriors, at the heart of their culture, stood the warrior. To the Gauls, courage in battle was the highest virtue. They trained their sons to fight from youth, to wield sword and spear, to charge with shield raised and voice lifted in fierce cries. They fought not in silent ranks like the Romans, but in wild fury, each man seeking to prove his valor before the gods and his tribe. Before battle, some would strip naked, their bodies painted with bright dyes, their hair stiffened into wild crests. They carried long swords of iron, oval shields painted with symbols, and spears tipped with bronze. The clash of their charge was like thunder rolling across the earth. To their enemies, they seemed like forces of nature, unbridled and terrible. Yet they were not merely destroyers. They were craftsmen of war. Their swords were long and sharp, their mail armor among the first in Europe. They bred swift horses, and their chariots rattled across battlefields. Among them were champions, warriors who stepped forward before battle, challenging the bravest of the enemy to single combat. Victory in such duels brought not only honor, but also the blessing of the gods. Druids. But the Gauls were not only warriors, they were also dreamers, thinkers, and priests. At the center of their spiritual life were the Druids, keepers of wisdom, guardians of sacred law, interpreters of the will of the gods. The Druids taught that the soul does not die, but passes into another world, to return again in cycles of life. They performed rituals in sacred groves, beneath ancient oaks, beside rivers and stones. They memorized long verses of law and lore, for they wrote nothing down. Their knowledge was preserved in memory, carried like fire from one generation to the next. They judged disputes, guided chiefs, and taught the young. They knew the stars, the healing herbs, the mysteries of the unseen. To kill a druid was to wound the tribe itself, for they were the voice of wisdom and the bridge between man and the divine. The character of the Gauls. So what kind of people were they? Fierce in battle, yet hospitable in peace. Proud of their freedom, yet bound to their clans. Lovers of gold, of feasts, of song, yet also dreamers who gazed at stars and believed in worlds beyond this one. To the Greeks, they seemed barbarians, wild and dangerous. To the Romans, they were both enemies to fear and allies to respect. But to themselves, they were simply the people, strong, free, alive. Their world was a patchwork of tribes, the Aedui, the Arverni, the Sequani, the Helvetii, the Belgae. Each had its own lands, its own leaders. Sometimes they fought each other, sometimes they allied. Unity was rare, Yet in their diversity lay their strength, a rich mosaic of cultures woven together beneath the Celtic name. Closing reflection. As you drift deeper into rest, hold this picture in your mind. Rolling green hills beneath a silver sky, forests thick with oak and pine, rivers winding like veins of light. Villages nestled by streams, smoke curling upward. Warriors sharpening swords, women weaving cloth, children chasing each other in laughter. Druids chanting prayers beneath sacred trees. This was Gaul, the land and the people. A world of strength and beauty, of wildness and wisdom. A world that would one day collide with Rome in battles that shook history. But for now, let us rest in its beginning, in its forests and rivers, in the simple lives of the tribes who called themselves free. Breathe slowly and let their story linger in your dreams. Daily life of the Gauls rest now, and let us step deeper into the world of the Gauls. Beyond the thunder of battle, beyond the clash of spears and the roar of war cries, there was another life, a quieter life, the daily rhythm of men, women, and children. To truly know the Gauls, we must walk through their villages, sit by their hearths, and watch them live as they once lived. Villages in the hills picture. A Gallic village as the morning mist begins to lift. It stands on a rise above the river valley, surrounded by palisades of timber, with gates that creak as farmers lead their cattle to the fields. The air smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and fresh bread baking on the hearth. Children laugh as they chase one another through the muddy paths, while dogs bark and hens scatter. The houses are built of timber and clay, their roofs thickly thatched with straw. Some are round, like the shape of a wheel, with walls curving inward toward a central fire. Others are rectangular, long houses with space for both people and animals. Inside, smoke curls upward through holes in the roof, and the warm glow of the hearth is the heart of the home. Families rise early with the sun. Women grind grain on stone querns, their hands steady with the rhythm of centuries. The coarse flour is baked into flat loaves, eaten fresh with milk or cheese. Men gather tools, sickles, plows of wood and iron, ready to till the soil. Children fetch water from the well or the stream, carrying it in clay jars balanced on their hips. Farmers and fields. The Gauls were above all farmers. Their wealth did not lie only in gold or plunder, but in the harvest of their fields. They grew wheat and barley, rye and oats. They planted beans, peas, and lentils, tended orchards of apples and pears, and gathered berries from the forests. They were skilled in crop rotation, knowing when to let land rest and when to sow anew. Cattle were precious, more than simple beasts of burden. They were symbols of wealth, measures of a family's standing. Sheep gave wool for clothing, pigs rooted in the forests, horses were bred for war and for speed. In summer, the air was filled with the sound of scythes cutting through grain. In autumn, wagons creaked under the weight of harvest, pulled by oxen along the dirt tracks. In winter, families gathered by the fire, mending clothes, telling stories, waiting for spring. The Gauls feasted when the harvest was done. Long tables of wood were laid with roasted meat, steaming bread, cheese, honey, and jugs of mead or beer. Music rose, played on flutes and drums, while warriors boasted of battles and children drifted into sleep at their mothers' knees. Clothing and adornment. The Gauls loved color. Their clothes were not plain, but bright, woven with checks and stripes of red, blue, and green. Women spun wool on spindles, dyed it with plants and minerals, and wove it into cloth on tall wooden looms. Men wore tunics and trousers fastened with bronze or silver brooches. Women wore long dresses, belted at the waist, with cloaks in colder months. Jewelry was common, not only for the wealthy. Bronze bracelets, rings of iron, beads of glass or amber hung from necks, but the most treasured adornment was the torque, a heavy ring of twisted gold or silver worn around the neck. To wear a torque was to carry honor, to show wealth, to embody the pride of the tribe. Hair, too, was a mark of identity. Men washed it with lime, stiffening it into bright, spiked crests. Some bleached it into shining blonde, others let it flow long and wild. Mustaches were grown thick, curling over their lips. Women braided their hair, sometimes coiling it into knots adorned with pins of bronze or bone. To the Gauls, appearance was not vanity, but identity. To be seen as fierce, as noble, as beautiful. This was part of life, just as important as courage in battle or skill in farming. Food and drink. The daily food of the Gauls was simple, but hearty. Bread was the foundation, coarse loaves baked on hearthstones, flavored with herbs or seeds. Porridge of barley or oats, thick with milk, warmed them in the mornings. Cheese was made from goat and cow milk, salted to last through the seasons. Meat was a prize: pork, beef, lamb, and game hunted in the forests. Zuhuaso, deer, wild boar, hare. Fish swam in the rivers, and birds filled the skies, snared with nets or arrows. Vegetables were boiled into stews with meat, flavored with leeks, garlic, and onions. They brewed drinks of grain and honey. Mead, sweet and golden, was beloved, drunk at feasts. Beer, brewed from barley, was common, thick and hearty. Wine came from the south, traded with Greeks and Romans, and though rare at first, it became a treasure of chieftains' feasts. At the table, hierarchy mattered. The bravest warriors and the noblest leaders sat at the center, served the choicest cuts of meat. Drinking horns and cups passed from hand to hand, filled and refilled as songs were sung and tales told, music and storytelling. In the evenings when the fields were quiet and the sun sank behind the hills, the Gauls gathered for music. The sound of flutes made of bone or wood, the deep thrum of drums, the blare of war horns echoed into the night. Their songs were wild and haunting, sometimes fierce with the rhythm of battle, sometimes soft with the sadness of loss. Storytelling was their memory. Bards with voices strong and clear recited the deeds of heroes, the lineages of chiefs, the tales of gods and spirits. They carried the past in verses memorized, never written, always spoken. Around the fire, children listened wide-eyed, learning the world through song. Families and women. Family was the center of life. A house was not only a roof, but a clan, bound by blood and loyalty. Fathers taught sons to hunt and fight. Mothers taught daughters to spin, to weave, to tend the hearth. But women were more than keepers of the home. In some tribes, they owned land, led negotiations, even stood in battle. Roman writers, astonished, described Gallic women advising councils and marching with warriors. Marriage was a bond between clans, sealed with dowries of cattle or treasure. Children were many, cherished, raised to honor their ancestors. Elders were respected, their wisdom guiding decisions, their stories binding generations together. Craftsmen and traders. The Gauls were skilled craftsmen. Blacksmiths forged iron swords sharp enough to cleave shields, and plows strong enough to turn heavy earth. Bronze workers shaped ornaments, pins and brooches of intricate beauty. Potters made vessels of clay, painted with patterns. Glassmakers shaped beads in shimmering colors. They were traders, too. Along the Rhone and Garonne, they sent goods south to the Mediterranean. They gave furs, amber, salt, and slaves, and received wine, oil, fine pottery, and jewelry. Along the north, they traded across the sea with Britain, their ships carrying goods across the waves. Religion in daily life. Religion was everywhere. The Gauls did not separate the sacred from the ordinary. Every river, every grove, every stone was alive with spirit. To cross a stream, they might offer a coin. To cut a tree, they might whisper a prayer. Sacred groves were places of gathering, where druids led rituals, sacrifices were made, and the will of the gods was sought. Festivals marked the seasons. At the harvest, fires were lit, feasts held, songs sung to thank the gods for abundance. At midwinter, they marked the turning of the sun, the promise that light would return. At spring, they prayed for fertility, for fields and herds to grow strong. Life was bound to cycles, the cycle of sun and moon, of sowing and reaping, of birth and death. The rhythm of life. So passed the days of the Gauls. Work in the fields, laughter in the villages, music in the evenings, prayer beneath the trees. They were a people both simple and complex, both fierce and gentle. To the Romans, they were barbarians. To the Greeks, wild northerners. But within their world, they lived with a rhythm as deep as the rivers, as eternal as the mountains. They woke with the sun, worked with the earth, feasted with their kin, and honored their gods. Their lives were brief, their world often dangerous, but in its own way, it was full of joy, of love, of meaning. Closing reflections now, as you breathe softly, let this image stay with you. A Gaulish village at twilight. Smoke rises from hearths, glowing red in the dusk. Farmers return from the fields, leading cattle into pens. Women stir pots of stew, children laugh in the fading light. Warriors sit sharpening their swords, while druids walk in the groves, murmuring prayers. Music rises, pipes, drums, the deep horn echoing across the valley. This is daily life among the Gauls. Not kings, not conquerors, but people, living, working, dreaming. Their story is our story. For all peoples live in the rhythm of earth and sky, of birth and death, of family and memory. Rest now, and let their lives mingle with your dreams. The spirit of the Gauls. Close your eyes once more. The land of the Gauls is before you. Forests thick with oak, rivers winding silver in the moonlight, hills crowned with mist. But beyond the fields and villages, beyond the daily life of farming and feasting, there was something deeper. The spirit of the Gauls. Their world was alive with unseen powers, with gods, with ancestors, with mysteries that shaped their lives. The living world. For the Gauls, the world was not silent stone and empty sky. It was alive. Every tree carried a spirit. Every river whispered with a voice. Every stone held memory. The earth itself was sacred, breathing beneath their feet. When they walked through the forests, they did not see mere wood and leaf. They felt presence, gods watching from the shadows, spirits dwelling in roots and branches. To cut an oak, they asked permission. To fish in a river, they made offerings. The world was not theirs to master, but theirs to share, theirs to honor. Imagine them standing in a clearing, the sun shining through branches, the air filled with birdsong. To the Gauls, this was not simply nature. This was holy ground, the Druids. At the heart of their spirit stood the Druids. They were priests, judges, teachers, and philosophers. They held no swords, yet their power was greater than any warrior. For the Druids carried knowledge. They taught that the soul does not die. It leaves the body, yes, but only to journey to another world, to return again in time. Death, they said, was not an end, but a turning of the wheel. To a Gaulish warrior, this belief gave courage. Why fear death if the soul will live again? Why tremble before the grave if beyond it lies another dawn? The Druids spoke not from books, for they wrote nothing down. Their wisdom was carried in memory, preserved in verse, recited by heart, passed from master to pupil. For 20 years or more, a young Druid might study, learning the laws, the genealogies of tribes, the songs of the gods, the patterns of the stars. They were healers, gathering herbs in moonlight, whispering incantations as they mixed their potions. They were astronomers, watching the sky, measuring the seasons, guiding farmers in the timing of sowing and reaping. They were judges, settling disputes, ensuring that honor was kept and oaths unbroken. But most of all, they were the bridge between the people and the divine. When sacrifice was made, the druids led the rites. When omens were sought, the druids read them in the flight of birds, in the shapes of clouds, in the entrails of animals offered to the gods. Gods and goddesses. The gods of the Gauls were many. Some were shared across tribes, others known only to one valley or village. Their names were whispered by rivers, carved into stones, sung in battle cries. There was Tutatis, protector of the tribe, guardian of people and land. There was Tyrannus, god of thunder, his voice the rolling storm, his weapon the wheel of the sky. There was Isus, fierce and mysterious, linked with sacrifice and power. There was Epona, goddess of horses, beloved by riders and farmers alike, her image spreading far across the Celtic world. The sun and moon were holy. Rivers were worshipped as mothers, giving water and life. Springs were sacred, places of healing, where offerings of coins, weapons, and jewelry were thrown into the depths to please the spirits. Forests were temples without walls, groves where no tree could be cut, no soil disturbed, for they belonged to the gods. The Gauls did not imagine their gods far away. Seated in some unreachable heaven, their gods were near, walking the earth, breathing in wind, dwelling in fire. To live was to live among them, sacrifice and ritual. To honor the gods, the Gauls gave offerings, sometimes food, sometimes weapons, sometimes the first fruits of harvest. Into rivers they cast golden torques. Into sacred pools they dropped coins, shimmering like stars beneath the water. At times, they gave greater gifts. Animals were sacrificed, bulls, horses, pigs, their blood spilled as prayer. The druids raised their voices, calling on the gods to bless the tribe, to protect the land, to grant victory in war. There are tales told by Roman and Greek writers of human sacrifice. Captives taken in battle, some said, were offered to the gods, their lives exchanged for the tribe's safety. Whether these stories were truth or exaggerations by enemies, we cannot know fully. Yet for the Gauls, sacrifice was never cruelty for its own sake. It was communion, a bond with powers greater than themselves. The afterlife. What lay beyond death? For the Gauls, it was not an ending. They believed the soul traveled to another world, perhaps across the sea, perhaps into the stars, but always to return again. In graves we find swords, shields, jewelry, feasting cups, treasures placed so that the dead might carry them into the next life. Nobles were buried with golden torques around their necks, warriors with their chariots beside them, women with mirrors and ornaments. Death was not departure, but continuation. Because of this belief, the Gauls did not dread death as final. To die bravely was to step proudly into the next world. To live dishonorably was worse than death itself, for shame could stain the soul even across lifetimes. Festivals of the Seasons. The year of the Gauls was a wheel, turning with the seasons. Each spoke of the wheel was marked by festival, by ritual, by celebration. At midwinter, they lit fires to call back the sun, to ensure its return from the long nights. At spring, they prayed for fertility, for crops to grow and herds to multiply. At summer, they held great gatherings, feasting and trading, renewing alliances among tribes. At harvest, they gave thanks, offering the first fruits, feasting until their voices echoed in the night. Fire was sacred. At festivals, great bonfires blazed, their smoke rising to the stars. People leapt across flames for luck, drove cattle between fires for blessing. The wheel of the year turned, and with it, life itself. Birth, growth, harvest, death, and rebirth. The Gauls saw themselves within this cycle, their lives part of the greater rhythm of earth and sky. The spirit of battle. For the Gauls, even battle was spiritual. War was not only about land or wealth, but about honor, about offering courage to the gods. Before a charge, warriors raised their voices in wild cries, a sound meant to terrify enemies and to awaken the spirits of war. Horns blared, drums thundered, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Some warriors fought naked, their bodies painted in bright colors, their hair stiff with lime, their eyes blazing. To the Romans, they seemed madmen. To the Gauls, they were consecrated, offering themselves wholly to the gods of war. To die in such fury was a form of worship. The mystery of the bards. Alongside the druids stood the bards, singers, poets, keepers of memory. They carried history not in ink, but in voice. With lyres and harps, they recited the deeds of ancestors, the lineages of kings, the victories of heroes. Their verses were long, flowing like rivers, remembered and recited across generations. Through them, the past was never lost. Every feast, every gathering echoed with song. In their music, the Gauls found identity. In their stories, they found immortality. The soul of the Gauls. When we gather all these threads, the druids, the gods, the sacrifices, the festivals, the bards, we see the spirit of the Gauls. They were a people who lived close to nature, who saw divinity in every tree and stone. They were a people unafraid of death, who believed in cycles unbroken. They were a people bound by ritual, by song, by story. The spirit of the Gauls was fierce, but also tender. Fierce in battle, but tender in reverence for earth and sky. Fierce in honor, but tender in song and story. Closing reflection. Now, as you lie resting, imagine yourself in a sacred grove of the Gauls. The trees rise high above, their branches woven into a living roof. The air is thick with silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves. At the grove's center, a fire burns, its smoke curling into the sky. Druids stand with white robes, chanting prayers. Warriors lay down their swords as offerings. Women and children watch in reverence, their faces lit by firelight. Above them, the stars gleam, eternal and watchful. The gods are near, felt in the wind, in the crackle of flame, in the heartbeat of the earth. This was the spirit of the Gauls, to live with reverence, to die without fear, to honor the unseen powers that shape their world. Breathe deeply. Let the grove fade into dream. Let the songs of the bards soften into silence. Sleep, as the Gauls once slept beneath the same stars, knowing that life is a cycle, and every ending is but a new beginning. The Gauls in Europe. Close your eyes again. Breathe slowly. Let the stillness of night carry you back, past centuries, into a time when the Gauls were not only farmers and villagers, but wanderers, warriors, and conquerors. Their land was fertile, yes, but their spirit was restless. Like rivers that overflow their banks, the Gauls did not remain only within the valleys of France. They moved, they marched, they spread across Europe, leaving echoes from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. The restless spirit. The Gauls were not one kingdom, but many tribes, bound together loosely by language and culture, and yet they shared a certain spirit, a hunger for land, for wealth, for glory. Their population grew, their villages multiplied, and with growth came pressure. New lands were needed for cattle, for crops, for sons who sought their own homes, and so they set out. Not as a single army, but as waves, tribe after tribe, moving across mountains and rivers, settling in new lands, clashing with neighbors, carving out new homes. Imagine them on the march, wagons creaking, women and children riding, warriors walking with shields and spears, horses snorting in the cold air. Behind them, the old villages, before them, unknown lands. Into Italy. One of their greatest paths led south, into the Italian peninsula. There, fertile valleys beckoned, rich plains spread before them, and the young city of Rome stood among the hills of Latium. In the 4th century before Christ, the Gauls poured through the passes of the Alps. Among them were the Senones, fierce and hungry for land. They clashed with Rome at the river Allia in 390 BCE. The Romans fought bravely, but the Gauls overwhelmed them. Rome fell. The eternal city, so proud, so strong in later centuries, lay open, its streets filled with fire, its temples broken, its people fleeing in terror. The Gauls roamed the streets, their war cries echoing against the stones, their axes smashing doors. The Romans never forgot this wound. Even centuries later, the memory of the sack burned in their hearts. To them, the word Gaul meant terror, meant humiliation, meant the nightmare of fire and sword. But to the Gauls it was triumph, proof that no city was beyond their reach, no power too great to challenge. The Gauls in the north of Italy. In the centuries that followed, many Gallic tribes settled in the fertile lands of the Po Valley. The Insubres, the Boii, the Cenomani, and others established themselves in what the Romans would later call Cisalpine Gaul. Gaul on this side of the Alps. They built villages, tilled the soil, and yet never abandoned their warrior spirit. From these new homelands, they raided deeper into Italy, clashing with Etruscans, Samnites, and Romans alike. For Rome, the Gallic presence so close to its heart was a constant shadow, a reminder of vulnerability. It would take centuries before Rome finally subdued them. But in these centuries, the Gauls of northern Italy thrived, both feared and respected. Beyond Italy, to Greece south and east, the Gauls marched again. In the early 3rd century BCE, tribes from beyond the Alps surged into the lands of Greece and Macedonia. The world still remembered Alexander the Great, who had died only a few decades before. His empire had shattered, leaving kingdoms fragile, contested. Into this chaos poured the Gauls. They were mercenaries, adventurers, raiders. Some served kings for gold, their swords hired for foreign wars. Others came in great migrations, seeking plunder and land. In 279 BCE, a vast host of Gauls descended into Greece. They crossed rivers, stormed towns, and at last reached Delphi, the sacred heart of Greece, the temple of Apollo himself. The Greeks told later how Apollo defended his shrine. Storms and earthquakes struck the invaders, rocks tumbled from the mountains, the Gauls scattered in terror. Whether truth or legend, the story lived on. Even the gods themselves rose to protect Greece from the northern barbarians. Yet though Delphi stood, the Gauls left their mark. They had reached the very center of Greek civilization, proving again that their power could shake even the proudest dreams. The Gauls in Asia Minor, Galatia. Not all the Gauls returned from Greece. Some crossed further east, through Thrace into Asia Minor, the land we now call Turkey. There, they settled. 3 tribes, the Tectosages, the Trochmi, and the Tolistobogi Siwa, carved out a new homeland. They became known as the Galatians. Their name was still Gaul, though their land was far from Gaul itself. In this new country, they lived as they had before, farming, feasting, fighting. They served as mercenaries for kings, fought in the wars of the Hellenistic world, and built their villages on Anatolian soil. Centuries later, when the Apostle Paul traveled and wrote his letters, he addressed the Galatians. These were the descendants of Gauls, still carrying their name in a land thousands of miles from the forests of France. The Gauls as mercenaries. Across Europe and beyond, the Gauls were famed as mercenaries. Kings of Greece, lords of Carthage, rulers of Egypt, all hired Gaulish warriors. They were prized for their ferocity, their courage, their skill with sword and spear. Picture them marching under foreign banners, their hair wild, their eyes fierce, their laughter loud around campfires. To fight was their nature, and gold from distant lands only added to their glory. Wherever wars raged, Gauls were there, a living tide of mercenary valor, their reputation spreading with every battle. The reputation of terror. To their enemies, the Gauls seemed unstoppable. They were not disciplined like the Romans, nor subtle like the Greeks. They were fury made flesh, charging with cries that froze blood, wielding swords that hacked through shields. Their love of display added to their terror. Some fought in mail, gleaming with iron. Others stripped bare, their bodies painted, their hair spiked into golden crests. They challenged foes to single combat before battles, roaring insults, daring champions to meet them. Roman writers describe them with a mixture of awe and fear. They mocked their wildness, yet admitted their courage. They called them barbarians, yet borrowed their weapons, their mail armor, their chariots. The Gauls were both feared and admired, symbols of the raw power of the north, the limits of expansion. And yet, their expansions were not endless. Though they sacked Rome, they could not hold it. Though they reached Delphi, they could not keep it. Though they settled in Asia Minor, they remained a minority, surrounded by Greeks and Anatolians. Their greatest strength, the freedom of their tribes, was also their weakness. They fought with passion, but rarely with unity. Each tribe sought its own glory, its own plunder, its own land. When united, they were unstoppable, but unity seldom lasted. In time, Rome grew stronger. Greece recovered. The kingdoms of the East hardened. The age of great Gallic wanderings began to fade. The echo of expansion. Still, their mark remained. In Italy, their descendants lived for centuries, woven into the fabric of Roman life. In Galatia, their name endured into the time of Christ. In Greece, the memory of their assault on Delphi lingered in myth. The Gauls were no longer only the people of France. They were Europeans, stretching across the continent, leaving footprints in lands near and far. Closing reflection. Now, as you rest, imagine the march of the Gauls across Europe. Hear the creak of wagons, the snort of horses, the clash of shields. See the long lines of warriors, their hair stiff with lime, their torques shining in the sun. See the women guiding oxen, the children laughing, the elders chanting prayers to the gods of journey. They cross mountains, they cross rivers, they descend upon new lands with fire and courage. Cities tremble, kings hire them, gods themselves rise to resist them. This was the Gauls in Europe, restless, fearless, far-reaching. Their story was not only in their homeland, but in every land their feet touched. And though their conquests faded, their echo remained, whispered in Rome's memory, sung in Greek tales, carved in the name of Galatia. Rest now with the rhythm of their march in your dreams. The Gauls move onward, into history, into legend, into the quiet of the night. The Roman threat breathed deeply now, and let us walk further along the path of history. The Gauls had roamed far and wide, shaking the ancient world. They had sacked Rome, terrified Greece, settled in the lands of Italy and Asia Minor. Yet beyond the horizon, another force was growing, one that would change their fate forever. That force was Rome. Shadows from the south. At first, Rome was only one city among many in Italy, a stubborn city, scarred by the memory of the Gallic sack in 390 BCE. That wound never healed. Generations of Romans carried it like a fire in their hearts, a vow of vengeance whispered beneath their walls. Never again. For years after, Rome fought its neighbors, Etruscans, Samnites, Greeks. Slowly, stubbornly, it grew stronger. By the 3rd century before Christ, Rome had become the master of Italy. Its legions were hardened, its discipline unmatched. Where once Gauls had broken its lines, now Rome trained to never break again. The Gauls still lived freely to the north, in the fertile valleys of the Po and beyond the Alps. To Rome, their presence was both threat and temptation, a reminder of fear, but also a land rich for conquest. First clashes. In 295 BCE, Gauls marched again into Italy, this time alongside Samnites and Etruscans united in defiance of Rome. At the Battle of Sentinum, the Romans faced them. The Gauls came with their chariots, their warriors painted and fierce. They charged with cries that shook the hills, yet the Roman legions held. Line upon line, shield upon shield, their discipline turned the tide. For the first time, Rome broke the Gauls in open battle. The victory was costly, but it changed the balance. The Romans had proven that Gallic fury could be withstood, that courage could be matched with order. The province of Rome. In time, Rome pushed not only into Italy, but into Gaul itself. Along the Mediterranean coast, Greek cities like Massilia, modern Marseille, traded with both Rome and the Gauls. This region, rich and strategic, drew Roman interest. In 125 BCE, Rome intervened to protect its allies. By 121 BCE, the legions had defeated the Arverni and the Allobroges, 2 powerful Gallic tribes. Rome carved out its first province beyond Italy, Gallia Transalpina, Gaul across the Alps. In time, it would be called simply Provincia, the province, a name that survives today as Provence. This was the beginning of Roman rule in Gaul. Roads were built, colonies founded, trade secured. For the tribes of southern Gaul, Rome was no longer a distant shadow. It was their new master. The divided tribes. The Gauls were many peoples, many voices. Some resisted Rome fiercely. Others, weary of wars with neighbors, allied with the legions. The Aedui, for example, sought Roman friendship, while others, like the Arverni, longed to defy them. This division was Rome's advantage. The legions marched not only with swords, but with treaties, playing tribe against tribe, weaving alliances that bound Gauls to Roman cause. Yet among the Gauls, resentment grew, for though some prospered through Rome's trade, many felt the weight of its presence. The shadow of conquest loomed larger each year. The migration of the Cimbri and Teutones. In the late 2nd century BCE, new threats came from the north. The wandering peoples known as the Cimbri and the Teutones. They swept down through Gaul in vast numbers, a tide of men, women, and wagons. The Gauls watched them pass, sometimes clashing, sometimes allying. But Rome could not ignore them. At first, the Cimbri and Teutones crushed Roman armies, inflicting humiliations that reminded Rome of the old Gallic terror. But in 102 and 101 BCE, the Roman general Marius defeated them in decisive battles. The lesson was clear. Rome's legions were now stronger than ever, capable of facing not only tribes, but nations on the move. The Gauls saw this, and unease grew. The looming general, and then, into this stage stepped a man whose name would be forever bound to the fate of the Gauls, Julius Caesar. But before Caesar, Rome had already made its intentions known. By the mid-1st century BCE, it had secured southern Gaul, controlled the routes to Spain, and tightened its grip on trade. The tribes of the interior still lived free, but the shadow of Rome crept closer with every passing year. A clash of worlds. The Roman threat was not only military. It was cultural. The Gauls lived in tribes, each proud of its independence. Rome lived in order, in law, in hierarchy. The Gauls sought glory in single combat, the thrill of the charge. Rome sought victory in discipline, the strength of formation. The Gauls measured wealth in cattle, in gold torques, in feasting halls. Rome measured wealth in land, in tax, in coin. The Gauls honored druids, who spoke of spirits and cycles. Rome honored senators, who spoke of law and empire. These were two worlds, each strong, each certain, now standing on the edge of collision. The fear of Rome. To the Gauls, Rome was both ally and menace. They traded with it, drank its wine, wore its goods. Yet they also remembered. They remembered Sentinum. They remembered the province carved from their land. They remembered the way Rome turned tribe against tribe. Some whispered that Rome would never stop, that soon its legions would march not only in the south, but through all Gaul, conquering village after village, tribe after tribe, and they were right. Closing reflection. Now, as you rest, imagine the horizon of Gaul in the 1st century before Christ. To the north, freedom still reigns. Tribes hunting, feasting, worshipping their gods beneath sacred oaks. But to the south, the eagle standards of Rome glitter. Roads spread like veins across the land. Colonies rise with stone walls and tiled roofs. Legions march, their shields shining, their steps pounding like thunder. Between these two worlds lies tension, waiting to break. The Gauls, proud and fierce, still live by their ancient ways. But the Roman Republic, vast and unyielding, grows ever closer. The threat is here, the storm is coming, and soon Julius Caesar himself will bring the fire of conquest to their lands. Breathe softly. Let this shadow rest in your thoughts, not as fear, but as story. For though the Gauls will fight, though Rome will rise, their spirit will live on, remembered, honored, never truly lost. Julius Caesar and the Gallic Wars. Rest deeply now, and let your mind drift to the 1st century before Christ. The Gauls are many tribes, scattered across fields and forests, bound by culture, but divided by rivalry. Rome has claimed the south, the province along the Mediterranean. Tension lingers, fear whispers, and into this moment steps one of history's most ambitious men, Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar arrives in Gaul. The year is 58 BCE. Caesar, newly appointed governor of Roman Gaul, arrives with legions at his back. To the Romans, Gaul is both danger and opportunity. Its tribes are restless, its lands fertile, its people fierce. To Caesar, Gaul is more than this. It is a stage, a place where he can win victories, secure glory, and carve his name into eternity. His command gives him 3 provinces: Cisalpine Gaul in northern Italy, Transalpine Gaul in the south of France, and Illyricum along the Adriatic. But beyond lies free Gaul, a vast mosaic of tribes untouched by Roman control. This land becomes Caesar's ambition, the Helvetii migration. The spark comes quickly. The Helvetii, a Celtic people from what is now Switzerland, decide to leave their mountain valleys. Pressed by neighbors, seeking new lands, they gather wagons, families, herds, and march westward across Gaul. Imagine them. Thousands of people on the move, a tide of men, women, children, cattle, and carts. Their migration threatens to sweep across Roman allies, to destabilize all of Gaul. Caesar acts. He blocks the Helvetii at the Rhone, burning bridges, forcing them north. When they march through the lands of the Aedui, allies of Rome, Caesar follows. The clash comes at Bibracte. The Helvetii fight with courage, their wagons drawn up as walls, their warriors fierce. But Caesar's legions, disciplined and relentless, grind them down. After days of battle, The Helvetii are broken. Survivors are sent back to their homeland, forced to rebuild their villages, never again to roam. This is Caesar's first great victory in Gaul. The tribes take notice. Rome has shown its teeth. Ariovistus and the Germans. But another threat looms. Across the Rhine, Germanic tribes under Ariovistus have crossed into Gaul, seizing land and demanding tribute. Some Gallic tribes, desperate, had once invited them as allies. Now they are overlords, cruel and grasping. Caesar sees both danger and opportunity. If Ariovistus strengthens, Gaul may fall to German power. But if Caesar defeats him, his own fame will grow. He marches north. Ariovistus sends envoys, proud and arrogant, demanding Caesar leave. Caesar refuses. The legions advance. At last, the armies meet in the plain of Alsace. The Germans form deep ranks, their warriors locked with shields. The Romans press forward, their pila flying, their swords cutting. The battle is fierce, the outcome uncertain, until Roman discipline prevails. Ariovistus flees across the Rhine with the remnants of his host. Caesar has done what many thought impossible. He has defeated the Germans in Gaul. The tribes watch in awe and in fear. The Belgae rise. The next year, 57 BCE, brings a new challenge. The Belgae, tribes of northern Gaul, unite against Rome. Fierce and warlike, they gather in numbers greater than any Caesar has yet faced. The legions march north, through rivers and forests, into Belgic lands. Battles rage at the river Aisne, where Caesar holds a bridge against overwhelming numbers. One by one, the Belgic tribes falter. Some surrender, others scatter, their unity dissolving under Roman pressure. Yet the courage of the Belgae becomes legend. Caesar himself writes that of all the Gauls, they were the bravest, for they lived closest to the Germans and fought them constantly. Their resistance, though crushed, leaves an impression of valor that endures through history. The Veneti and the sea. In 56 BCE, rebellion brews on the western coast. The Veneti, masters of the sea in Brittany, refuse Roman demands. They seize envoys, defy legions, and trust their ships to protect them. The Veneti's ships are sturdy, built for the wild Atlantic, with high prows and thick hulls. The Romans, unskilled at sea, struggle, yet Caesar adapts. He orders ships built, with hooks to tear down sails and rigging. In a great naval battle, the Veneti fleet is broken. The punishment is harsh. Their leaders are executed, their people sold into slavery. It is a warning. Rome's reach extends not only over rivers and plains, but across the sea. Revolts and resistance year by year, Caesar campaigns. The Eburones, led by Ambiorix, ambush Roman legions in 54 BCE, slaughtering thousands in the forests of Belgium. The revolt spreads, fierce and sudden, yet Caesar strikes back, burning villages, crushing resistance. Ambiorix himself escapes, vanishing into legend, never captured. Elsewhere, tribes rise and fall, sometimes defying Rome, sometimes allying with it. The wheel of conquest turns, grinding down opposition, drawing more and more of Gaul into Caesar's grasp. The siege of Avaricum. In 52 BCE, war reaches its fiercest. The Bituriges, allied with others, defy Rome. They retreat to Avaricum, a strong city defended by walls and marshes. Caesar lays siege. Winter rains fall. Hunger gnaws, yet the legions build ramparts, towers, engines of war. Slowly, relentlessly, they encircle the city. At last, the walls are breached. The Romans pour in, swords flashing, flames rising. Of 40,000 within, almost all are slain. Caesar spares neither woman nor child. Only a few escape. It is conquest at its harshest, remembered with dread. Vercingetorix and the Great Rebellion. Out of this fire rises a leader, Vercingetorix, chieftain of the Arverni. Tall, commanding, with hair flowing like a lion's mane, he unites the tribes as none have before. He understands what others did not, that only unity can resist Rome. He calls for scorched earth, for burning fields, for denying Caesar supplies. Villages are torched, grain destroyed, so the Romans cannot feed themselves. The Gauls rally in numbers greater than ever. At Gergovia, Vercingetorix wins a stunning victory. Caesar, for once, is beaten, his legions retreating down the slopes in disarray. Hope surges among the Gauls. Perhaps Rome can be defeated. The siege of Alesia. But Caesar is not yet finished. Later that same year, 52 BCE, Vercingetorix retreats to the fortress city of Alesia, high upon a hill. Caesar surrounds it. His legions build lines of walls, ditches, towers. Not one ring, but two. One faces inward to starve the defenders. The other faces outward to resist Gallic relief armies. And they come. Tens of thousands of Gauls march to free their leader, filling the plains with warriors, their cries echoing. From within Alesia, Vercingetorix's men surge forth. From without, the relief forces attack. The Romans are caught between two storms, yet Caesar's walls hold. His discipline, his engineering, his ruthless will prevail. The relief army is broken. Inside Alesia, hunger gnaws until hope fades. At last, Vercingetorix rides out. Clad in armor, proud even in defeat, he lays down his weapons at Caesar's feet. The rebellion is over. The dream of a free Gaul dies with it. The aftermath. With Alesia, Caesar secures his conquest. Some tribes resist longer, but the great unity of Gaul is shattered. Rome now holds dominion. Towns are rebuilt, roads laid, tribute gathered. For Caesar, the conquest brings wealth, power, and fame. His commentaries, written in clear Latin, tell Rome of his victories, portraying the Gauls as brave, but doomed, himself as brilliant and unstoppable. For the Gauls, it is the end of independence. Their druids are suppressed, their lands taxed, their sons conscripted. Yet their spirit does not vanish. In memory and legend, they remain fierce, their courage honored even by their conquerors. Reflection on the wars. The Gallic wars were not only battles of swords and shields, they were a clash of worlds. Tribal freedom against imperial order, passion against discipline, diversity against unity. The Gauls fought with fire, with courage unmatched. But Rome fought with steel and structure, with patience and persistence. And in the end, it was Rome that triumphed. Yet Caesar himself admits, the Gauls were not weak. They were among the bravest he had ever faced. And in their last stand at Alesia, in the figure of Vercingetorix, they won a kind of immortality. Closing reflection now, as you drift towards sleep, imagine Gaul in those years of war. Hear the tramp of legions, the clash of iron, the cries of warriors. See the smoke rising from villages, the fires of sieges, the long lines of marching men. See, too, the face of Vercingetorix, proud, unbending, even in surrender. He is the spirit of Gaul, fierce in defiance, noble in defeat. The wars are over, the land subdued. But the story of the Gauls lives on, in song and memory, in the stones of their ruined cities, in the whispers of their forests. Rest now, with their courage in your dreams. For though Rome conquered, the Gauls remain eternal in spirit, a people who lived free, who fought bravely, who left their mark upon the heart of Europe. Vercingetorix, the hero of the Gauls, breathe slowly, and let the story unfold. Among the many chieftains of Gaul, among the countless warriors who raised spears and swords against Rome, one name rises above all the others. A name remembered not because he won, but because of how he fought, because of what he symbolized, because he dared to dream of unity in a divided land. His name was Vercingetorix, the birth of a leader. He was born among the Arverni, a powerful tribe in central Gaul, in the highlands of what is now Auvergne in France. His father, Celtulus, had once been a great leader himself, accused by rivals of seeking kingship over all the tribes. For this ambition, Celtulus was put to death. Thus Vercingetorix grew up in a world of rivalry and betrayal, knowing both the weight of legacy and the danger of ambition. Yet within him burned a fire, the fire of his people, and the dream of something greater. He was tall, commanding, with long hair that flowed over his shoulders, a noble presence that inspired men to follow. Even Caesar, his enemy, admits his charisma, a man of great skill in war, with courage enough to hold together the unruly tribes of Gaul, the spark of rebellion. By 52 BCE, Gaul was weary. Years of Caesar's campaigns had left villages burned, fields ravaged, tribes divided. Some had allied with Rome, hoping for safety. Others had fought and fallen. But resentment simmered everywhere. Vercingetorix seized the moment. He called his warriors to arms. He declared that Rome was a foreign tyrant, bleeding Gaul of its freedom, dishonoring its gods. He demanded unity. At first, even his own people doubted. Some of the Arverni chiefs cast him out, but Vercingetorix would not be silenced. He gathered loyal men, rallied allies, and returned in triumph, claiming leadership not only of his tribe, but of a wider cause. Tribe by tribe, messenger by messenger, he spread the call. Join together or fall alone. The scorched earth Vercingetorix was no ordinary chieftain. He understood Caesar's power, not only in battle, but in supplies. The legions moved like machines, but they needed grain, fodder, shelter. Without them, even Roman strength could wither. So Vercingetorix ordered a radical strategy: burn everything. Fields, villages, barns, all to be destroyed, so the Romans would find only ashes. It was a cruel choice, for it meant hardship for his own people. But it was also brilliant, a sacrifice for survival. Village after village went up in flames. Smoke darkened the sky. Caesar's soldiers marched through wastelands, their stomachs empty, their spirits strained. For the first time, Rome felt the sting of hunger in Gaul. The victory at Gergovia. Vercingetorix's strategy soon bore fruit. At Gergovia, his hill fortress, he lured Caesar into a trap. The Romans, climbing the slopes, met fierce resistance. Confusion spread, legions faltered, and for once, Caesar's discipline could not save him. The Romans retreated, battered and bleeding. It was a rare defeat for Caesar, a dazzling victory for the Gauls. Hope soared. Songs were sung. For a moment it seemed as if Rome itself might be driven out. The name of Vercingetorix spread across Gaul like fire in the wind. Chiefs who had once hesitated now pledged themselves. Tribes who had stayed quiet now took up arms. For the first time in generations, Gaul was united, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to shake the world. Caesar's relentless pursuit. Yet Caesar was not a man to be undone. He struck back with fury, his legions moving swiftly, punishing those who wavered, forcing submission where he could. But Vercingetorix always stayed a step ahead, refusing open battle, retreating into strongholds, striking only when the ground favored him. He fought not only with swords, but with strategy, shaping the land itself into his ally. The Gauls, under his command, fought like wolves, swift, elusive, deadly. The last stand at Alesia. At last, the two destinies collided at Alesia, a great fortress on a hill in Burgundy. Vercingetorix withdrew there with his army, knowing Caesar would come, and Caesar did. The Roman general built walls, not one, but two. An inner ring to trap the Gauls inside, an outer ring to keep out the reinforcements he knew would come. Ditches, towers, palisades, miles of fortifications spread like scars across the land. Inside Alesia, food grew scarce. Outside, vast Gallic relief armies gathered, perhaps the largest force Gaul ever assembled, hundreds of thousands strong. They surged against Caesar's walls, while from within, Vercingetorix's warriors attacked. The earth shook with battle. Arrows darkened the sky. War cries thundered from both sides. For days the Romans fought on two fronts, stretched to breaking, their discipline tested as never before. And yet, the walls held. Caesar's legions endured, repelling charge after charge. Slowly, the Gallic relief broke, exhausted, scattered, defeated. Inside Alesia, despair spread. Food was gone. Hope was gone. Vercingetorix, noble even in defeat, made his choice. The surrender. The stories tell that he mounted his horse, clad in his finest armor, his hair flowing, his face unbowed. He rode out of Alesia, circled once around Caesar's camp, then dismounted. Before the Roman general, he cast down his weapons, offering himself for his people. It was not victory, it was not freedom, but it was dignity. It was the act of a leader who bore the weight of his people's fate. The tribes laid down their arms. Gaul was broken. Rome had triumphed. And yet, the image of Vercingetorix surrendering with pride would outlive even the memory of the battle itself. The captive of Rome. Taken in chains, Vercingetorix was sent to Rome. For years he languished in prison, a symbol of conquered Gaul. In 46 BCE, Caesar celebrated his great triumph, parading his spoils through the streets of Rome. Among them was Vercingetorix. Proud still, though shackled, he walked the streets of the city that had feared his people for centuries. Romans gazed at him with wonder, perhaps even with respect, for he embodied an enemy worthy of their empire. At the triumph's end, as was Roman custom, he was executed. His body perished, but his name endured. The legacy of Vercingetorix's rebellion failed. Gaul became a Roman land, its tribes subdued, its druids suppressed, its people absorbed into empire. But his story did not vanish. It became legend. To later generations, he was the hero of Gaul, the one who dared to unite, the one who resisted Rome with fire and courage. Even the Romans who defeated him remembered his bravery. Caesar himself, in his commentaries, acknowledged the power of his leadership. Centuries later, when France sought its roots, it looked to Vercingetorix as a symbol, not of defeat, but of pride. Statues rose of him, long-haired, sword in hand, defiant still. His name became not a memory of loss, but of identity. The spirit of a hero. What makes a hero? Is it victory, or is it the courage to fight against impossible odds, the will to stand when others falter, the vision to unite what is divided? Vercingetorix did not live to see freedom, but in his defiance, he gave the Gauls something greater, a memory that outlasted conquest, a spirit that Rome itself could not erase. Closing reflection. Now, as you rest, imagine Vercingetorix standing tall upon the hill of Alesia. Around him, the fires burn low. His warriors, weary and hungry, look to him with trust. Beyond the walls, Caesar's legions wait, their standards glittering in the sun. He knows the end is near, and yet he does not despair. He mounts his horse, lifts his head, and rides forth, not broken but unbowed, not victorious but eternal. This was Vercingetorix, the hero of the Gauls. His name still whispers in the forests of France, in the stones of ruined forts, in the spirit of resistance that lives wherever people dream of freedom. Sleep now, with his courage beside you. Let his story become your dream, the story of a man who rose from fire, who fought with honor, who became a legend beyond time. 8. Gaul under Rome. Close your eyes again. The fires of battle have faded, the thunder of legions, the cries of warriors, the smoke of villages. All are quiet now. The rebellion has been broken, Vercingetorix taken, the tribes subdued. Gaul, once a land of free peoples, now lies within the grasp of Rome. But conquest was only the beginning. For the true story of Gaul under Rome was not told in the clash of swords, but in centuries of slow change, in fields and cities, in laws and languages, in the very spirit of the land. The dawn of Roman Gaul. After Caesar's victory at Alesia in 52 BCE, Gaul was not immediately calm. Small rebellions flickered, some tribes still resisted, but Rome's grip tightened with each campaign. By 50 BCE, the land was subdued. When Caesar left Gaul to march on Rome itself in civil war, his legates and governors remained. They collected tribute, enforced law, and built the first structures of imperial control. Soon, Augustus, the first emperor, completed the work, organizing Gaul into provinces, binding it into the Roman world. 4 great provinces were formed: Gallia Narbonensis in the south, already Romanized since the days of the province; Gallia Aquitania in the southwest; Gallia Lugdunensis in the center and north; and Gallia Belgica in the northeast. Together they stretched from the Mediterranean to the Channel, from the Rhine to the Atlantic. The free Gauls, once bound only by tribe and custom, now found themselves subjects of empire. The Pax Romana in Gaul. The wars were brutal, but with conquest came a kind of peace. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, spread across the land. The old cycle of tribal raiding, of constant feuding, of endless rivalry, slowed. The legions garrisoned fortresses, guarding roads and frontiers. Law courts settled disputes. For the first time, Gaul knew stability across its vast territory. With stability came prosperity. Fields could be farmed without fear of sudden war. Trade routes stretched across mountains and rivers, guarded by Roman power. The Gauls had lost freedom, but they had gained security, and for many, weary of centuries of conflict, this was a bargain worth accepting. Roads, cities, and aqueducts, Rome's mark upon Gaul, was most visible in stone. The legions built roads, straight and enduring, crossing the land like veins. From Lugdunum, modern Lyon, roads spread in every direction, binding the provinces together. Merchants, soldiers, travelers, and messages moved swiftly along them, carrying not only goods, but ideas and culture. Cities blossomed. Where once there were villages and hill forts, now rose towns of stone and marble. Amphitheaters, temples, baths, and forum transformed the landscape. Lugdunum became the great capital of Roman Gaul, its theater and aqueduct symbols of empire's presence. In Nîmes, an amphitheater stood tall, where gladiators fought and crowds cheered. In Arles, a grand arena rose. Across the land, aqueducts carried fresh water. Bridges spanned rivers. Harbors welcomed ships. The Gauls had once lived close to the forest, close to the soil. Now they also lived in Roman cities, where Latin echoed, laws were read, and coins changed hands. The blending of cultures. But Rome did not erase Gaul. Instead, over time, Roman and Celtic ways blended. The Gauls kept their gods, but often gave them Roman names. Lugus, the bright god, became Mercury. Tyrannus, the thunderer, became Jupiter. Epona, goddess of horses, was worshipped even in Rome itself. Temples rose where druids had once led rites in sacred groves. The Celtic language lingered for centuries, but Latin spread, first in the cities, then through the countryside. In time, the two mingled, and from their mingling would one day be born the French language. The Gauls wore Roman tunics and togas, but often with Celtic patterns and bright colors. They used Roman coins, but decorated them with Celtic designs. They fought in Roman legions, but carried with them memories of tribal warriors. Identity shifted. They were no longer only Gauls, nor yet fully Romans. They were something in between. Roman Gauls, a people at the crossroads of worlds. The decline of the Druids. Perhaps the greatest change was in religion. The Druids, once the heart of Gallic spirituality, were suppressed. Rome feared their influence, their ability to unite tribes, their independence of spirit. Augustus and later emperors outlawed their gatherings. Temples of stone replaced groves of oak. Written law replaced memory, yet the old ways did not vanish easily. In hidden places, people still whispered prayers to ancient gods, still honored rivers and trees, still believed in cycles of the soul. Beneath the marble of Roman temples, the earth still remembered. Gauls in the Roman army. Many Gauls, once enemies of Rome, now fought for it. Recruited into auxiliary units, they marched not only across Gaul, but across the empire, to Britain, to Germany, to the deserts of Syria. They carried Roman standards, but in their hearts they carried memories of home. In time, Gauls rose even higher. Roman citizenship spread, first to elites, then to wider groups. Some Gallic nobles became senators in Rome itself. By the 2nd century, men born in Gaul could rule provinces, command armies, even wear the purple of the emperor one day. Centuries later, an emperor named Claudius, born in Lugdunum, would sit upon Rome's throne. The land once conquered had become part of Rome's beating heart. Daily life under Rome. What was life like for the ordinary Gallic villager, now under Roman rule? In the countryside, little changed at first. Farmers still plowed fields, still herded cattle, still feasted with neighbors. But Roman taxes claimed a share of their grain. Roman officials inspected their lands. Roman markets demanded their goods. In towns, life was more transformed. Shops lined stone streets, baths offered warm water and conversation. Theaters brought plays and spectacles. Gladiators fought lions. Roman officials gave speeches. Coins stamped with the emperor's face jingled in purses. Children learned Latin in schools. Elders watched Roman law, settled disputes once handled by druids. Women dressed in Roman styles, wore Roman jewelry, but still wove patterns of Celtic beauty. It was not the old Gaul, nor yet entirely Roman. It was something new, something unique, a fusion of worlds. Rebellions and resistance. Yet not all accepted Rome quietly. In 21 CE, the Andecavi and the Turoni rose in revolt. In 68 CE, during the case of Rome's civil war, the Gaulish noble Julius Vindex led a rebellion, proclaiming freedom for Gaul. His revolt failed, but it showed that the dream of independence had not died. Other uprisings flickered, sometimes joined with German tribes across the Rhine. Each time, Rome crushed them, yet the memory of resistance lingered like a heartbeat beneath the empire's surface. Prosperity and transformation. Despite rebellion, Gaul flourished under Roman rule. Its fertile fields made it one of the empire's breadbaskets, feeding cities far away. Its mines gave iron, silver, and gold. Its craftsmen forged weapons, pottery, jewelry admired across Europe. Wine flowed from southern vineyards, grain-filled ships bound for Italy. Cattle and horses grazed in wide pastures, traded to armies at the frontiers. Gaul became not a province of despair, but a jewel of empire. Wealth grew, cities flourished, culture blended. By the 2nd century, Gaul was as Roman as Spain, as Africa, as any province beneath the empire's wings. Christianity in Gaul. In the centuries that followed, a new faith arose. Christianity spread quietly at first, carried by travelers and preachers. By the 3rd century, small communities prayed in hidden rooms, worshipping not Jupiter or Mercury, but Christ. In Lugdunum, early martyrs were killed for their faith, yet the new religion grew, slowly, persistently. By the 4th century, it became the empire's faith, and temples of old gods gave way to churches. Gaul, once the land of Druids and Celtic gods, became a land of bishops and saints. But even then, the old spirit lingered in memory. The love of the land, the sacredness of rivers and forests, woven into Christian thought in subtle ways. The legacy of Roman Gaul. What then was Gaul under Rome? It was conquest, yes, a loss of freedom, a silencing of Druids, a fading of old ways. But it was also creation of roads and cities, of peace and prosperity, of a new identity. The Gauls did not vanish. They became part of Rome, yet kept something of themselves. Their descendants would one day become Franks, then French, carrying both Celtic roots and Roman heritage. Rome conquered Gaul, but Gaul also transformed Rome. From its land came soldiers, emperors, saints, and scholars. From its spirit came resilience, creativity, and a memory of freedom that would echo through centuries. Closing reflection now. As you drift toward sleep, imagine Gaul beneath the Romans. Roads stretching like ribbons across hills. Cities gleaming with marble, their forums filled with merchants and magistrates. Amphitheaters ringing with cheers. Farmers tending fields, children learning Latin, priests offering sacrifice in temples. But also imagine what lies beneath. In the forests, the whisper of druids. In the rivers, the memory of old gods. In the people's hearts, the stubborn pride of their ancestors. For Gaul under Rome was never only Roman, never only Gallic. It was a meeting of worlds, a blending of traditions, a land where conqueror and conquered became one. Rest now, with this image in your mind, a land transformed, yet still alive with its spirit, still carrying forward the echoes of those who once called themselves free. Sleep deeply, for the story is not yet finished. Rome itself will one day weaken, and Gaul will rise again in new forms, carrying its legacy into the future. The echo of the Gauls breathes slowly. The story of the Gauls has carried us from their wild homelands and sacred groves across Europe to Rome's battlefields, through the fire of conquest, and into centuries of transformation under empire. Now the tale grows quieter, for the Gauls as a distinct people disappeared into Rome, yet their spirit lingered, like a song that continues long after the singer has left the stage. This is the echo of the Gauls, the ways they survived in memory, in culture, in the land, in the identity of future generations, a people absorbed, but not erased. By the 1st centuries after Christ, the Gauls were no longer Gauls in the old sense. They were Romans, citizens of an empire, speaking Latin, living in stone towns, serving in legions, worshipping in Roman temples. The Druids were silenced, the tribes renamed, the Celtic tongue fading into whispers. And yet, something remained. For a people cannot simply vanish. Their blood still flowed in the veins of farmers, merchants, soldiers. Their customs still lingered in village rituals. Their gods lived on, hidden beneath new names. Their love for freedom and defiance, once expressed in war, now echoed in memory. The roots of France. As centuries passed, new peoples arrived. The Franks swept into Gaul, giving their name to the land that would become France. Roman power waned, cities shrank, roads crumbled. Yet beneath these layers, the Gauls still lived on. The French language itself carried their echo. Though Latin became the tongue of empire, the Gaulish language left marks in place names, in words, in sounds that colored French speech. Villages, rivers, and mountains still bear Celtic names, reminders of those who named them long before Rome. Even as France was born from the mingling of Romans and Franks, the spirit of the Gauls was there too, deep in the soil. Echoes in folklore and custom. In rural Gaul, old beliefs lingered. Farmers still whispered charms to the earth, offered gifts to rivers, celebrated the turning of the seasons with festivals older than Rome. Some of these customs were absorbed into Christianity: harvest feasts, midwinter fires, midsummer celebrations. The saints of new faith sometimes wore the garments of old gods. Legends carried memories too. Tales of magical forests, of heroes who defied great powers, of warriors who fought bravely even in defeat, all carried the echo of Gallic spirit. The old druids were gone, yet wise men and women in villages still held fragments of their lore, passed down in quiet, hidden ways. Rome remembers. Even the conquerors remembered their foes. In Rome, Vercingetorix became a symbol of the noble enemy, fierce, courteous, proud, worthy of respect. Caesar himself, in his writings, did not dismiss the Gauls as weak. He called them brave, clever, and dangerous, admitting that only unity had eluded them. Later, Romans looked back on the sack of their city by Gauls in 390 BCE as a warning, a reminder that even the eternal city had once trembled before Celtic fury. Thus, in Roman memory, the Gauls remained as both terror and honor, feared and admired, defeated but unforgettable. The French rediscovery. Centuries later, in medieval and modern times, the French rediscovered the Gauls as their ancestors. Chroniclers wrote of them as the first people of the land, noble forebears whose courage explained the French spirit. In the 19th century especially, when nations across Europe sought deep roots, France turned to the Gauls. Statues were raised of Vercingetorix, heroic and defiant. Writers celebrated him as a national hero, a symbol of unity and pride. The memory of his stand at Alesia was transformed from defeat into legend, a moment when Gaul showed its greatness, even against impossible odds. The Gauls became, in French imagination, the origin of the nation. School children learned that they were descended from our ancestors, the Gauls, though not literally true, for France was a mixture of many peoples. The symbol mattered. It was the echo of identity. The echo in language. Even today, echoes of the Gauls remain in words and sounds. French, though born of Latin, carries traces of Celtic Gaulish. Names of rivers like the Seine, the Marne, and the Loire come from Gaulish roots. The word cheval, for horse, carries echoes of Epona, the horse goddess once revered in Gaul. Even the rhythm of French speech, softer and more musical than Latin, may carry a Celtic influence, the distant whisper of a vanished tongue still shaping sound. The spirit of resistance. Most of all, the echo of the Gauls' lives in spirit. They were remembered as people of freedom, defiant against empires. Their rebellion under Vercingetorix became a symbol of unity against oppression. In times of struggle, the French invoked their Gallic ancestors, proud, stubborn, unwilling to bow. Even when history turned against them, they fought with courage, leaving behind not only ruins, but a legend. The land itself. Walk through the fields of France, and you can still feel their presence. Hilltops crowned with ancient oppida, their walls long crumbled. Stone circles hidden in forests. Mounds that hold the bones of chiefs and warriors. The land remembers, even when people forget. In the rivers, once sacred to Celtic gods, the echo flows. In the mountains, once home to wandering tribes, the echo lingers. In the villages whose names are older than Rome, the echo speaks. What endures? The Gauls were conquered. They were absorbed. Their names faded from history books, replaced by Romans, Franks, French, and yet they endure. In memory, in identity, in the soil, in the blood, in the imagination. Every people carries such echoes. For though empires rise and fall, though names change, the spirit of those who lived before does not vanish. It lingers, shaping those who come after, whispering in ways seen and unseen. Closing reflection. Now, as you drift into sleep, let the echo of the Gauls carry you. Hear their laughter at feasts, their war cries on battlefields, their songs beneath sacred trees. See their golden torques, their painted shields, their long hair flowing in the wind. Feel the fire of their courage, the weight of their freedom, the dignity of their resistance. Though their time passed long ago, they remain, not in armies, not in kingdoms, but in memory, in the echo that carries forward across centuries into the present. Sleep now with the Gauls in your dreams, for their story is not truly finished. Every time freedom is cherished, every time courage is honored, every time people remember their roots, the Gauls live again. Their echo endures, in history, in legend, in us.